Okay, I hope everyone sees me right now. We had mini technical challenges that made it so that one of the co-moderators of this event is not with us as of yet. Maybe he will join us. So I said that I might just start talking freely about the things that I was going to mention anyhow, and we're going to navigate the conversation as it goes along with your questions and with potentially Eddie, who's going to join us later on. So as I'm talking, I'm planning to speak for about 15 minutes about my work and how it got me to look at security and the brain. But I also encourage you to type your questions and put them in the chat so we can use those to navigate the conversation forward. Okay, so in case you stumbled upon this conversation without knowing what to expect, I'm a neuroscientist. I'm a professor of neuroscience and business. I teach neuroscientists how the brain works, and I teach business students and companies how to use neuroscience in their day-to-day experience to understand their customers better, to understand themselves better, and to make decisions better. However, in the context of this conversation, my background is relevant because before becoming an academic in the last 15 years, I spent over a decade in Israel as a computer hacker. So my job back then was starting from a very young age as a kid of the 80s to a soldier in the Israeli intelligence to an employee of Checkpoint in the beginning and future companies in Israel afterwards, pretty much to either train engineers on how to write secure code, what pitfalls they should expect when it comes to security flaws across the years. So dial-up security flaws in the early 2000s up to the application security later in the years. And as part of my career, primarily in the beginning of the era of online banking primarily, I was doing what we now call penetration testing. And back then we didn't have a name for that. We called it active marketing, where we would essentially hack into large corporations and go to the administration, to the authorities who were overseeing them and tell them about flaws we found and basically pull them towards improving the security. I'm talking the year 2000, roughly 2001, where there were very few online services of the type that we see nowadays, and most of the time was spent just convincing people that when we were able to hack into their systems and we find ways to extract the data, it wasn't the end. So we would typically get into, say, a bank's vault, be able to move money from one account to another, show to the management that we were able to do that, and get the answer, yes, okay, so you find the problem, so now that we can solve that, this is going to be the end. So we had to do 2 or 3 times the same process before people were convinced that they actually need security. These days are over. Judging by the many of you that are listening to us right now, I assume that there's now a career that you all could join without needing to convince anyone that there's a need for you. And what I'm going to talk to you about in the next 10-15 minutes is where I think this world is going when it comes to hacking and security, and what you should do to be prepared for that, and also to capitalize on the potential business-wise that's out there. So to explain the transition, I would say the following. In the year 2004, when I was working as a hacker in a company, I had no intention to become an academic, let alone a neuroscience professor. And a chance encounter that I had with Professor Francis Crick, who some of you who are history buffs may know was the person who discovered the DNA and won the Nobel Prize in 1953 for explaining how the double helix work. He and I had a dinner randomly, not at all academic inspired, and we chat about the world. And I mentioned to him back then that I'm working as a hacker, that I was actually in San Diego, where he lived at the time, to test the security of some local company. And he was fascinated by the world of hacking and how it works. He didn't know that it's a profession. And he started musing about his experience as a radio analyst, I would say, signal analyst during World War II, So he was in England during World War II, one of the team that essentially was doing counterintelligence and trying to figure out how to decrypt codes. And he reflected on the fact that having had this experience as a hacker, let's call it, in the war, allowed him to actually move to academia later on and use the same methods to solve the problems of double helix. When he joined James Watson and looking at DNA, he didn't know anything about biology, but he was looking at a code that had 3 letters that give meaning to some proteins, and he could use the same technologies that he used during the war to figure out that the code actually has 3-letter text that they code for different things, but actually you can find analogies between them and even some connections between different molecules. And he said that to him this was really critical to his career, and he put the word out there that paved my path further by saying, if you know how to hack into systems, I suggest moving from looking at computers to looking at the most complicated vault in the world right now, our brain. It took some time for me to follow his advice, but later on I realized that indeed the ultimate vault that we're all secure in a way, in different ways, is the brain. Because all of our data out there, all of the passwords we use, all the information we put in the world is an extension of information is in our head that we share. So when you choose a password, in the end, at some point, there was a process in your brain that created this password, made up the combination of letters, characters, symbols, and chose them. And it's stored in some database out there as a way to match that you are you. And it's presumably also stored somewhere in your brain who created this thing. And as random as you are, there's something about your brain that predicts the choice of password that you selected out there. So in many ways, the data is in the vault. And if someone could have full access to our brain, they could essentially both get access to everything we created, but more so, they could predict what you're going to create next. As in, if I look at your passwords right now, and I look at the system in which you created the password, and I see that essentially, let's say your password is some reversed play on the website domain name, I could infer that the next password that's going to be created for a new website that you didn't even visit yet is going to have some combination of those. So if I figure out how your brain creates passwords, I could start predicting things that you don't know about yourself. For a while, this was an idea that people were toying with, but it wasn't really applicable. Nothing concrete happened with that. And in the last couple of years, neuroscientists like myself are starting to play with the idea of seeing how far deep into your brain we can get and actually decode thoughts that you have there, predict things that you will do in the future, and even get access to things that are in your head that drive your behavior, but you yourself don't know. I'll speak about that in a few minutes, because to me, examples of that would be, for instance, the neuroscience as of the last 15 years of dreams that allows us to actually extract your dreams and change them. Or the neuroscience of changing behavior, where we can take a person that behaves one way, do things to their brain and make them behave differently. Those things suggest also profoundly that who we are isn't just the person who speaks on our behalf, but the sum of all of the processes in our brain, some of which are ones that we don't know ourselves. I'll give you maybe an intuition to that just to kind of get a sense. If you tomorrow have an accident and a part of your pinky is damaged, you would probably be very sad, but you would wake up yourself. You wouldn't be a different person. Your pinky is part of you, but it doesn't determine your identity. But if you lose similar sized part of your brain, you might wake up the morning after a totally different person, different behavior, different emotions, different desires, different aspirations. You might change entirely. And this is not just a made-up story. We have tons of evidence in case studies in medicine of people who had just that. Just recently, 10 years ago, there was a famous story of a woman in San Diego who called the police and said that they should come and arrest her husband because he woke up one morning as a pedophile. She said, we had a perfectly normal life for a number of years, and one morning he woke up and it totally changed, and I'm worried about my 4-year-old daughter. You've got to come and arrest my husband. And when the police came and arrested the husband and took him to court after they find a number of evidence in his computer suggested that he indeed was a pedophile collecting child pornography, he was standing in court, and while the trial was happening, he complained about a headache that people ignored on the first day, ignored on the second day, and couldn't ignore on the third day when he had a seizure in the courthouse. So from the courthouse, they rushed him to the emergency room where they looked at his brain and they saw a massive tumor pressing on the left front part of his brain, which sent him straight to the operating room where a neurosurgeon operated him for several hours, removing the tumor from his brain, connecting everything correctly, closing everything and waking him up, only to learn that as he woke up, on the one hand, he did not have the tumor anymore, but more interestingly, he was no longer a pedophile. As in, he said, I admit everything that I said just hours ago was not true. I was a pedophile, but I'm no longer the case. I don't know what happened to me. The change occurred randomly, and I really am torn on who this person in my head was. Then in a very unusual ruling, that set precedence for many others, the judge in this case ruled that it wasn't his fault. It was his brain's fault. And she actually sent him back home with a very short sentence. And this became a clear sentence that kind of is dramatically used by neuroscientists now to ask the question, what is the difference between me and my brain? When you say it's not his fault, it's his brain's fault, what is the difference between me and my brain? Now, this story has a twist that makes it even more interesting, that allows us to ponder even more about the differences, because this guy, after about 8 months, had another incident that was interesting, because the wife called again and said, my husband is a pedophile a second time. It's happening again. I don't know what's going on, but it's back. This time they were suspicious and they knew what to do, so they took him straight to the fMRI scanner where they scanned his brain to see what's going on, and they saw that part of the tumor metastasized and grew back and was pressing on the same areas that it pressed on before. So they had him go to a second surgery where they removed the residue of the tumor, after which he woke up again, not a pedophile. So this just shows us how strong a small change in our brain is in changing our personality. You can have small changes to chemicals or to connections in your brain that make you behave in ways that you cannot explain. Okay, so now that we all got this sense of the example, I want to tell you what is neuroscience doing right now to actually extract content from the brain, to change that, and to actually play in the domains that you are all interested in, which is security. And I'm going to put a teaser right now to what's the ultimate thing we're doing right now. What we're trying to do right now is see if we can, A, implant passwords in people's brains while they're, for example, sleeping, that they, when they wake up, choose and think that they chose themselves, but actually it was us who puppeteered their choice, can extract passwords that they have in their brain without their consent, and even create passwords that you can use that are in your brain, but you don't know. As in, if I torture you, I can't extract it because even though it's sitting in your brain, it's buried somewhere deep inside that you yourself don't really have access to. That's a teaser to where I'm heading. I'll start by telling you a little bit about the methods we use. So neuroscientists use various methods to understand the brain. I would classify them easily into two categories. With animals, mice and cats and dogs and monkeys, we do studies where we essentially open their brain, stick electrodes deep inside their head that go all the way to the neurons deep in the inner tissues, collect data from their brain that we can look at a computer, and then understand how thinking works in those animals without any mediation. We just look at their brain directly. This is something to do with animals because it allows you to actually open their brain and do a surgery that pokes inside. With humans, we can't do this extreme invasive surgery, so we do something else, which is we image the brain from the outside. So we use techniques like EEG, it's electroencephalography, a device that you put on your head that measures brain activity by listening to the activity of Am I better now? Okay. I saw a flash of the mic muted, and now I got messages that said that the mic muted. So I'm going to repeat the last minute again in case this was not heard. What I said is that there are kind of two types of neuroscientists study the brain. One group studies animals, and they do that. Is the sound still gone? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, I assume that that it works, even though I do see questions. Let me check. Okay, I assume. Okay, you're back. Thank you. I'm sorry for those of us who had to kind of hesitate whether it's working or not. It's working now. Back, I said that there are two types of neuroscientists. One type studies animals because they can actually probe inside the brain of an animal. Another type studies humans because they can image the brain from the outside. And there's a mix between the two, which is our team, that actually looks at the brains of humans who are undergoing brain surgery, where we open their brain, put electrodes deep inside their head, and eavesdrop on activity of neurons inside their head. The people we study are patients undergoing brain surgery for clinical purposes. They come because they have epilepsy and they want the surgeon to actually figure out where is the focus of the epilepsy so they can resect that and actually kind of fix their epilepsy. And what we do is we piggyback on the clinical process. We say, if there's going to be a human being whose brain is open and electrodes are placed in his head for clinical purposes, and he's going to be kept in a hospital for a period of about 2 weeks with open brain and electrodes sticking out of his head and connected to a computer, because the surgeons are waiting for him to have a seizure so they can see exactly where the seizure onset is, it's a good opportunity for scientists like myself to come and say, you know what, if you're already going to be here and you're already going to be sitting in bed and not really moving much because you can't really detach yourself from the computer, would you mind also having me ask you questions and have you set passwords or make decisions while I study your brain and understand how thinking works inside your head? And this is exactly what I've been doing for the last 15 years. And the number of things we learned are enormous. So I'm going to focus on a couple that I think are interesting in 1 minute each. One thing that we learned that I think is relevant for a lot of people in this audience is that we can actually map thoughts in your brain and decode them and even project them on a screen. So we could, in the morning, show this patient, say, 100 images of his mom, his dad, the Eiffel Tower, a laptop, a logo of a company, and just kind of, as he looks at the pictures, monitor his brain activity and see if at some point when he sees, say, the Eiffel Tower picture, a cell in his brain lights up. Then we do it again and again, show the picture again and again, look at the cell again and again, and if there's a perfect match between him seeing the picture and the cell light up, we can suggest that maybe this cell is coding the thoughts of this image. So when he thinks of the Eiffel Tower, this is what thinking of the Eiffel Tower looks like in the brain. And we can start finding gradually neurons in his brain that code different thoughts. Once we find those, we essentially can read his mind, because we know that when this cell lights up, he was thinking of the Eiffel Tower. So our experiments start with finding those cells and then just having the patient close his eyes and imagine one of, say, 100 things that he could think of, while we project on his screen in front of his eyes that are closed what he's imagining. So he's imagining something and we show a movie of his thoughts. That's step one. Step two, which I think is a version of step one, but I think is in many ways opens a vault for security hacks that you can all think about right now, is hacking his brain and changing things when he's sleeping. So we have him go to sleep and we listen to the brain cells when he's sleeping. And for example, when he gets to a dream state, when he dreams about something, we can actually extract his dream and see what he's dreaming of. He is likely to forget what he dreamt of when he wakes up, but we will know. So we now have access to things in his brain that he doesn't know about, but we do. And that is step two of accessing the brain. And step three, and to me, that's the one that I want to explore a little further, which is, I think, the most fascinating in many ways, is the freewheel component, we call it, which is knowing things about his brain that he doesn't know himself. So in an experiment we did with one of our patients, we had the guy play a simple game. I told him, we're going to put in front of you a box that has two big red buttons. It looks like a kind of classical arcade game box. There's a big box and two big red buttons. And we tell the guy, we are interested in how you make decisions. And the decision that you're going to make in this one is pretty simple, left button or right button. So we ask you to sit there, and whenever you feel like it, press one of the buttons, left or right. All we care about is when you make the choice, could you predict when you made it, and which one. So the patient sits there for 10 minutes and then he says, I feel like pressing the left one. And he just presses the left one. When he does so, a light bulb turns on. And I tell the guy, this light that's turning on right now is an indication to you that right now, after you made the choice, we're actually saving the data from your brain into a computer. And it's important that when this data saving is happening, you don't touch anything, because otherwise it will interfere with the experiment. It will actually overwrite the saving. So please just make sure that you press the button, you wait 2 seconds for the lights that is on to turn off again, data save is complete, and then you can start again whenever you want, press the left button or the right button. So the patient sits there for some time, and at some point he presses the left button, lights turn on and then off, then he presses the right now, on, off, and then the right again, on, off. He does that for some time, voluntarily. Now here's the cool part of this experiment. In the first, say, half an hour of the experiment, we just listen to the patient's brain. We try to see if we can find brain cells that come to life seconds before he initiates the button press. So we find cells in his brain that start firing, they start kind of becoming very active, maybe a second before he raises his hand and press the left button. So now we know a second before he is about to do something that he's going to do that. So I know at time 0 that in time 1 he's going to press the button. I have a heads up in the race to his consciousness. He will know that he wants to do something fraction of a second before he actually does it. We don't really experience life as if it's like planned and then executed. We don't really say, I'm going to say the word hello, hello. Things just happen to us in real time, and in many ways, when I speak to you right now, the words just come out of my mouth without me knowing that the brain had to plan them. I'm experiencing my voice as you. It just happens, and I own it, and I feel I'm an agent of that because it came out of my mouth. But in many ways, we're all witnessing my brain's processes without any of us knowing why words that were said were chosen to be said. So this guy, at time 0, has his brain make a choice. At time 1, he acts on the choice, and a little before, fraction of a second before, he feels that he wants to do that. So if I asked him, when did you feel that you want to press the button? He would say, a little bit before, but he wouldn't say a second before, because his brain predicted something that he doesn't even know. And here's the cool part. What we tell the guy earlier is don't touch the buttons when the lights are on. After some time, when we actually figured out how to predict his actions, what we can do is turn the lights on just before he presses the button. So when he's about to press the button, we turn the lights on just before, and then when he does press the button, it's already on. A big buzzer is playing in the room, and we tell the guy, what did you do? We ask you one thing. Don't touch the button when the lights are on. You just screwed the experiment. Let's try again. In the next time, please make sure you don't touch anything when the lights are on. He says, I'm so sorry, doctor, this kind of happened by itself. I don't know what happened. I promise I won't do it again. But of course, because we're in his head, even if he tries to do it faster, or he tries to trick us by going to the left and then moving to the right at the last minute, anything he wants to do is too late, because I'm in his head a second ahead of him. And we can do all kinds of tricks here. We can actually give him some times where he manages to just to encourage him, and then he can initiate the thing that stops him. We can actually stop him so early, as soon as we know, that he doesn't even know that he was about to do that. So if we turn the lights on so early, from the moment we know, it actually stops the process in his head, so he doesn't even feel the need to. So he doesn't know that he would want to press the button in 1 second if we had given him the chance. And it's basically me and his brain talking behind his back. And the point of this is to show you that neuroscience is getting closer and closer to the vault of your identity and starting to know things about you that you don't even know yourself. And what I wanted to make as a main point of this conversation is that our brain is right now not equipped to deal with this type of security flaws. All of you protect companies by putting security services on the companies with the assumption, the big assumption, that there's kind of a periphery and there's an inside. There's a perimeter you can protect, but you can also put some safety guards on each node in the network. It's easier to protect from the outside than from the inside, and that the hardest thing to protect from are someone just giving you the password directly. Like, you can have the best safeguards, but if someone just gives you the access by opening the door, it doesn't work. In many ways, this is where our brain is heading right now. Our brain doesn't have the security systems that our world is geared for. It has a really, really complicated way to protect itself from the outside world by creating sensors that filter the world into smaller chunks of reality. And it has one mechanism, cognitive reasoning, that's supposed to be skeptical and determine what's get in. But we are not used to a world where our thoughts are vulnerable. For example, your memories are yours and you trust that they got there through the senses. If you have a memory of something that happened, you trust it blindly. You will never doubt your own memories. You will never say, you know what, I have a clear memory of me doing this thing. I don't know if it's true. It's maybe someone just planted the idea in my mind. The way our brain works through years of evolution is that we have to trust our own memories. We have to build our narrative by weaving all the past experiences into one coherent story. And if someone starts toying with our mind and changing memories, we wouldn't be able to tell our own story correctly. We wouldn't know who we are. And right now, there's no way for us to actually save ourselves from the inside. Our skeptics systems are only protecting us from the outside. We would spend a lot of time vetting fake news and vetting information that we don't trust and looking at things and saying, I'm not sure about that, and my senses tell me that this guy is fishy, that I'm not gonna listen to him. A lot of things help us protect information from the inside. But once we ourselves put it in, we trust it blindly, and we never question our own thoughts. Since I'm suggesting that now we can actually change your thoughts by injecting ideas into your mind, putting passwords there that you didn't even control, changing your behavior while you're sleeping, the world ahead of us is one where what we need to protect is somehow the gap in our own mind between the speaking part of the brain and the unconscious one that delivers the ideas that may not be in sync. I'll tell you in 1 minute before I end why I think this is important, and then I'm going to finish with a big story about how I managed to navigate the world with this difficult problem. The idea I wanted to say is that the world we live in right now wasn't prepared for someone being able to hack into our brain. And in many ways, we need to change not just the security of our head, but also the way we think about the world around us. What I mean by that is that up to now, because hacking into our brain wasn't an option, we kind of created a world that is very central, humanist, surrounding around our thoughts as the main driver of our behavior. So when you go to vote, if you're in the US, there's an election in a few weeks. At the end of the day, when you go to the ballot box by yourself, standing behind a curtain and making a choice, the assumption of the system is that you can dig inside your mind, load your actual preferences and type them or punch them on a ticket, and this would be your true choice. Because at the end of the day, left alone to your own devices, you can pull from your brain your decision and your preferences, and they are you. We have sentences like the voter knows best, or the customer is always right, or beauty is in the eye of the beholder. All of them suggest that actually when stripped from all the biases from the world, we can actually understand what we want by digging inside our brain. I think this is changing. Trusting your own mind is a luxury that we had for millennia, but might not be the case anymore. When people can hack into your brain, change thoughts and change behaviors, there's a problem in trusting our own thoughts. The best advice I can give people on how to work with that is not the solution, but it's a step is broken into two. Part one, share your thoughts in real time with many people. What I'm doing right now is exactly that. If you have partners, family, close friends that you can share your thoughts, it's very hard for someone to hack into all of them, and you're working on redundancy. You might actually say, you know what, I'm not really sure why I chose this thing, and your friends and family will remind you because you put information from your brain into others' brain and created enough redundancy that they can help you. But you also have to trust them when they tell you, you know, what you do right now is not aligned with your past behavior. Something may have changed, listen to us. And that's a change that we have to accept that is really, really not common. Most of us think that we're the sole proprietor of our own thoughts. We're gonna have to start trusting people that are not us with our own behaviors and letting them guide us sometimes by using majority voice on our points. That's approach number one. Approach number two is what I call the April Fool's Day approach. Some of you know that in some countries, April 1st is known as April Fool, and it's a day where it's more legitimate than other days to prank other people and to essentially pull tricks on them and lie to them. I was with two friends just last year in April 1st, and one of them told us a story that, even though I know him really, really well, sounded like it's not going to be his story, even though he tried to kind of align it with past facts from his life. It makes it as real as it could get for a lie. And because I knew it was April Fool's, I said, you know what? This story, I know you well, and I know a lot about your story, and a lot of things make sense, but today is April 1st, and I know that you have an incentive to maybe lie, so I'm going to take your entire story and filter it to the sense that maybe you're lying, and try to kind of find flaws in it and see if I can break it down, even though it comes from a trustworthy source, a friend of mine. In a way, this is what we're going to have to do with our own brain when hacking humans' brain is going to start to be reality. We're going to start to have to say, you know what, I'm about to vote for this person. I think it aligns with my values and with my history, and I had the same preference for the entire 5 months now. What would make me change my mind? And start playing scenarios as if saying, maybe this choice is an April Fool's, and a trustworthy part of my brain that I always learned that should drive my behavior, like my memories and my past experiences, may be fooling me, and I might want to consider the option that's not there. Now, it's very, very hard. We're not used to it. Evolution spent decades teaching us how to trust our memories, trust our past experiences, and live by them and try to create alignment between them. But as it happens in a world where modules in our brain can be hacked, and others have to just believe that information that comes from within our brain wasn't tampered with, we're going to have to start questioning our own thoughts. I see questions appearing about it. I'm going to elaborate in a second, but I wanted to finish this part with telling you one story that, to me, is extremely helpful every time I challenge myself to kind of think about how could it work with me, myself, being not the driver of my own thoughts. That's, I think, the challenge that many of us are going to take in the following way. I'm going to write down a thought that I should share with you in response to a question that came out right now. So the story that allows me to remember time and again how vulnerable we are and how easy it is to shift mindset from within our brain is the story of Galileo Galilei. I'm just reading a book about him called Galileo Galilei and the Science Deniers, about his experience with people who did not believe his science and were rejecting his ideas. And one of the beautiful stories about Galileo Galilei from 404 years ago is a story where he built his famous telescope and observed one day the planet Jupiter and tried to observe the orbit of the moons of Jupiter. Jupiter has dozens of moons, and he was focusing on 2 of them and how they orbit the planet. And what he saw clearly is that the orbit doesn't align with this system of thinking of the time. Basically, the only way this would work out is if the sun was at the center of the universe and Jupiter and Earth were just 2 planets that orbit the sun, rather than Earth being the center and everything revolving around her. So this, to him, was a tough moment. Everything that he was trained for said that he is the center of the universe and that the world revolves around him. And now the data tells him that maybe that's not the case. Maybe he's just a planet, a small one, not a significant one, that kind of orbits a bigger star. And suddenly the idea of him being at the helm of the universe was shattered. But he took it. He went with the data, and he created a infographic of reality that suggests that the sun is the center, the Earth is the 3rd planet, and Jupiter next planet after Mars, and essentially a system that doesn't put him at the center. And even though it felt to him like a dethronement of humankind, what does it mean that we're not the center of the universe, that we're just one small entity out of many? It afforded us, in the 400 years that followed, to explore the wide reaches of the universe, the vastness of the stars systems, and to really understand a lot more about the world around us. In the same way, the last 10 years of neuroscience have uncovered to us that we are not the center of our own little brain, that even in our own head, the part that we call me, the part that speaks to you right now, the part that thinks he or she is in charge, that drives the wagon, that holds the rein, is actually not in charge. There's a much bigger part of us that sits under the hood, that determines our actions and our choices, that builds narratives, that gives the speaking part information to a voice. And essentially this part, the silent part, is much bigger and much more dominant in our life. And in many ways, it is hard for us to accept that. We're kind of like Galileo, trying to hold on to the small part as the driver of this big carriage, where the reality is that it's not. If we learn to accept, just like he did 404 years ago, that we're not the center of the universe, that in our own little universe, there are other parts that are much more dominant, that drive the wagon, and we are speaking for them and explaining them, but not driving them, we might be able to understand the most interesting thing in the universe, which is us. With that in mind, I'm going to now take your questions and follow any of the questions that came. So, okay, so I see first one. I'm going to just go from the top to the bottom. Okay, so one question is about how do you actually do that? So I kind of alluded to you can change your brains and you can actually manipulate thoughts. And so I'll give you quick 2 ways that we're doing it right now. One of them is not applicable to anyone in the room because it requires being inside the brain. And one is applicable to everyone. And I urge you not to exploit it because it's tricky and risky, and we don't want it to become the world we experience day to day. So the one that you cannot do easily is the invasive one that we do in my lab frequently. We have people come to the lab, go to sleep, with electrodes on their head, but not inside. So we don't drill a hole in this example. We just read their brain activity. And when they sleep, we monitor the brain activity to find small windows of time where they're in a state. It's called slow wave sleep. It happens roughly every 90 minutes for different durations. Sometimes it's 20 minutes, sometimes it's 30 minutes, but it's a phase in the night where your brain is essentially in deep sleep, but it's listening to the outside world and it's responding to it. As in, if something penetrates your brain in this moment, it becomes part of your experience. It changes your memories, it writes on them, or it deletes them. This is the moment where your brain essentially strengthens memories or prunes them. So if you learn something, a fact, when you're awake, at this moment, your brain essentially rehearses this fact and makes it into a stronger memory, such that when you wake up, you can actually use it in a more profound way. Now that we know that this is the part where the brain actually strengthens memories or weakens them, we can actually inject into the brain thoughts that will change memories. For example, using olfaction. So one of the things a colleague of mine did a few years ago, she had people come to the lab, go to sleep. Now, all the people were smokers who tried to quit in the weeks or months prior. What she did is she had them get to this unique state where their brain is listening, and then she sprayed into their nose the smell of nicotine, a trigger, an index, a pointer to the memory of smoking that will make their brain consider smoking or think about smoking. And then she immediately afterwards sprayed the smell of rotten eggs. Rotten eggs is a smell that's known to scientists to be a smell that actually doesn't wake you up. That's important, and injects negative thoughts. It actually kind of, it's an aversive response. So it kind of pairs with the first experience and makes you think, okay, smoking bad. She did it a few times to actually create this conditioning in your brain that smoking is bad for you. And then she lets you wake up naturally after 2 hours. And what she reports in her study is that people who were under this treatment for the 10 days that followed this experience didn't want to smoke anymore, or they reduced their smoking significantly. Now, none of them actually knew what happened. This happened to them while they were sleeping in a specific moment, but it had an effect that was lasting afterwards, and they didn't control this effect. So this was done to them. As an example, we're now playing with a variety of things, like making you choose to eat different things when you wake up by probing things when you're sleeping, making you choose different passwords by creating all kinds of associations when you're sleeping, and then we tell you when you wake up to choose a password that has 2 characters, 1 symbol, and 3 digits. It somehow picks up a memory that we injected of this pattern, and you choose a password that we made you choose. Basically, changing your preferences when you wake up by injecting thoughts into your brain while you sleep. The reason it's not easy to do and you have to have this device on your head is that we have to find out the right moment. If you just blast the brain with sounds or with smells at any given moment, it doesn't work. The brain rejects all of that and it kind of becomes desensitized to that. So you have to really be able to pick up the right moment, and that's where the neuroscience is. And this is why it's not something that you see every day done by many companies. The second thing that I think is more alarming is a study that started by 2 colleagues of mine, and now we're repeating it in my lab again and again. Is a study that, again, is tricky because I don't encourage you to apply it without consent, is one that we show how we can change memories in a very immediate, fast way by moving them slowly from A to B. The original experiment by my two colleagues, Lars Holl and Peter Johansson from Sweden, brought people to the lab and had them essentially make a simple choice. So in the experiment, the experimenter pulls two pictures of two cards with two pictures of, say, two women. And he says, you see now two women, you don't know any of them, they're both equally attractive. Choose which of the two you find more attractive, the one on the left or the one on the right. So the subject looks at them for a second and says the one on the left. And then the experimenter actually gives him the card that he chose and asks him to explain in one sentence why this was his choice. So hold the card in your hand and tell us, why did you pick this card? And the person might say, I picked this card because this woman's eyes are beautiful. So perfect, put the card to the side, let's try another pair. So we pick two pairs of two new images, show them to you and say again, you don't know these women, they're all strangers to you, equally attractive, roughly, who do you still find more attractive? And the guy say, this time the woman on the right. And then he gets the card that he chose, and he's asked to explain in one sentence why this was his choice. And he says, I really like her smile. This happens again and again for about 1 hour. For 1 hour, he keeps seeing pairs of cards and making decisions and explaining them. What he doesn't know is that the experimenter in this study isn't just a regular guy, he's a magician. And what he does is he uses sleight of hands in one of every, say, 20 trials or so to give the person the card he didn't choose. So if the guy chose this card, he's getting the other card. And the two interesting outcomes of this experiment, one is people don't notice. So people choose A, they get B, and they just take B and they don't say, sorry, experimenter, you actually gave me the wrong card. They just take what they were given and accept it. And the more interesting part from our perspective is that they then go on to explain to us why this was their choice. So they chose A, they get B, they take B, and they say, I chose B because so-and-so. So essentially, in the course of about 10 seconds, the brain made a choice. And when it was asked to explain a different one, it went with it. So if you look at it neuroscientifically, what happened there is the choice was made, the choice was stored in a memory, and then when the person was asked to explain, if I reverse the memory and I show you this was the choice, not that was the choice, you will just go on with a system that doesn't really know what the choice was. It just loads whatever is in the memory and explains it. So if I change something in your memory between the choice and the explanation, you will explain whatever is in your memory. So in the course of 10 seconds, we can reverse something, and as long as it doesn't really matter to you, as long as it's a simple choice out of many that's not really critical to you, you will actually take whatever was in your memory and come up with an answer. In a recent study we did a few weeks ago, we actually replicated this study, and we showed even more that if I then bring you back a few days later, and I tell you, let's do it again. I'm going to show you two cards and choose which one you find more attractive. If you chose A, I gave you B, and asked you to explain that, you're much more likely to actually choose B the next day, because you now, in your own brain, created a new memory that was overriding the original one that now makes you believe that your thoughts are yours, that your choice was yours. Because you have to explain it, you actually come up with a good answer. And now it's a reality for your brain. You think that a choice that you didn't make is your choice. So in a way, if I want to make you vote for the other candidate, if I just change something in the moment you put the note in the ballot and create a new memory, you will accept it, come up with a story why this was your choice, and from then on you will commit to the new choice, and you basically will vote for this person again and again in the future because you will convince yourself this is true. Now, the experiment I showed you was with simple choices that don't really matter. My colleagues actually repeated it with even more significant choices like political preferences and things that are much more relevant. There is a limit to it. It doesn't work with choices that are at the core of who we are. So if I replace your husband or your wife, you probably will notice that something changed. Or if I move you to a different house, you probably will change. But the key learning from that is that a lot of things can be changed. That if we do it in small steps, if we start by changing you from 8 to 9, 9 to 8, 8 to 7, we can actually take a person and move him entirely across the spectrum if we just do it in baby steps. And more importantly, I think that because life is mostly small choices, we don't really choose career, house, location to live in, people to marry every day. We choose those very infrequently. Most of life is simple choices like what to do today, what to eat for lunch, and so on. If we can start changing those, we can actually have a huge effect on people's lives. So, aligned with what I said before, this experiment shows us how vulnerable we are to changes and how the world around us requires you guys to think of ways to protect not just the data that we create digitally, but also the one that is in our brain. Okay, another question. Oh, I see there are many. Okay. There's so many. What do you think of neuroeconomics? I just picked randomly. So I'm part of the movement that tries to use neuroscience in business. It's a little bit different than neuroeconomics. Neuroeconomics is focused on essentially decision-making and trying to take all kinds of famous behavioral economic experiments and replicate them in the brain. So you probably know about all kinds of games like Prisoner's Dilemma, where two people have to make a decision. This is a classical game theory study. Neuroeconomics takes this game and have people play this game while their brain is being monitored. And the question is, what drives the behaviors in the brain? Like, what area in the brain makes you defect in the prisoner's dilemma or trust the other person? Can we change some things to make you defect more or trust more? Are there differences between kids and adults in the same game, men and women? All kinds of questions like this. And the key outcome for the scientists to do that is to understand the brain. How does the brain make decisions? The field is fantastic in the sense that it's given us a lot of understanding of how we think. It also has a caveat, which is because there's so much money in decision-making and in using neuroscience kind of like a black box to solve things, there's a lot of companies out there that offer snake oil. That basically take the word neuroscience, wrap it nicely in some kind of, we can tell you how to predict if your ad is going to work, or we can tell you how to make people vote for you. And because so many people are eager to get understanding, and because it's such a black box that there's no way to evaluate, you will find dozens of companies out there that offer solutions that scientists will tell you are probably not going to work for you. So if you stick to the science of it, I think there's a lot. If you start venturing into the business side of neuroeconomics, you will find yourself in a tough time knowing what does and what does not work. Okay. Another one from Eddie. Can you share your opinion about Elon Musk's Neuralink? Can it be hacked? How would it be hacked? What does the future look like for cyborgs? So the full disclosure is that I'm partially involved in this movement. And speak to all the companies and connect it directly to this particular initiative. So whatever I say right now should be taken with this qualifier. So I think that it's coming. So the idea of neural implants, if you don't know anything about the Neuralink idea, the idea is that you can actually put a little chip inside people's brain that will interface with the outside world, the ultimate brain-machine interface. So instead of, right now, if I want to know how to navigate from my home in New York to Wall Street, I can go to Google Map and type the question how to get to Wall Street, and it will show me a map and I can follow that, but I still have to have the device connect to the internet and give me the information. The suggestion of the Neuralink interface is that the connection will be straight from my brain to the world, such that when I want to know how to get to Wall Street, I will just basically think the thought that asks how it works, and suddenly I will know it the same way I know how to get to my kitchen or the bedroom. It just is in my navigation map in the head. So the world will be directly connected to our brain, and we can just navigate to Wall Street in this example without knowing that it didn't come from my own brain, but it came from the internet. Similarly, you want to know when was the French Revolution. Instead of typing on Wikipedia, give me the dates of the French Revolution, you just kind of ask yourself the thought, and it will emerge as 1789 without you having to know that it actually went to Wikipedia, asked the question, and put it back in your frontal lobe. So somehow the blurry line between what is us and what's the internet would become even blurrier. The barriers to entry of this for a while were that it requires a brain surgery. You have to actually open the skull and put something inside. The last couple of weeks have suggested that Elon Musk and his team, Neuralink, found a way to get there that's relatively safe and compelling, which they believe will actually make it into a market. People would actually start wanting to put implants in their brain when they see the advantages. I think that there's good and bad. The good thing, of course, is it's going to make us all smarter and much more connected. You could speak to people without even using words that are so slow. Even for me, when I speak very fast, my brain processes words at about 600 words per minute, and a regular person's voice speaks at about 150 words per minute. Even mine that's faster is about 250 to 300. So still half the thoughts I have in my head are filtered when I speak them. And then there's also the process on your head, which takes some time as well. It's very slow. If we can just copy thoughts from one brain to another, we can be very fast. This is just one example of the beauty of having neural implants in two brains. There are many others. The challenge that I see is in the inequality that it will create. So right now, we are living in a world that has levels of inequality that are unprecedented when it comes to money. You have people that are very, very wealthy and some that are very, very poor, and the gap between them is nearly impossible to reach. We have to change structurally a lot of things to actually level the playing field in many ways. But we still are living the same life, as in the richest guy in the world and the poorest guy in the world are still surviving roughly on the same level of realism. They eat to survive, they breathe to survive, they move their bodies. Everything around us is still part of the same reality. What neural implants can do to us is actually change the reality. So it might lead to rich people who have this implant seeing more of the world than others. So right now, humans are limited to seeing what the eyes can offer. We can only see between red to blue light. We can't see infrared or ultraviolet or gamma rays or X-rays. They're part of the world, but our eyes can't capture them, so we can't see them. Once we have neural implants, we can actually connect those to sensory devices that will allow us to see more of the world. Suddenly you will have agents in security in the airports that can just like look at a person moving and see that he has a gun in his pocket because they have infrared vision. They don't need the machines that scan the body. You can just see that. That's a good one. You can have people that connect this chip to devices in the outside world and they can operate machinery from afar. So you can fly airplanes without being on the airplane, or fly drones just by controlling them with your thoughts. And you will see in your eyes what the drone sees because the mapping would be one-to-one, and you can kind of feel what the drone feels. If there's wind, you can actually feel it in your body because the chip will give you the entire sensation, but you won't be there. So soldiers would not have to actually risk themselves. All good things. The bad things is that it might lead to inequality in thinking, as in the smart people would be much, much smarter, and the ones without the chip in their brain would be unable to actually communicate with them and would totally be limited. They would be less able to solve problems. The rich guys would probably have the smarts to actually make more money and accumulate more resources and be healthier and do better for themselves, and the poor guys would not. It will start deviating not just on small scale, but on huge scales, as in we will just live in different worlds, to the point that some even say that we're going to fork into two species. They just can't even interact with each other or even kind of communicate in many sensory ways. This is a risky thing that I'm not sure is a Pandora box that I would necessarily want to open. And I think that a lot of the time that I, as a neuroscientist, and my colleagues in Neuralink and other places are spending is on the building of that and what cool things we can do with it and how it could be used. But I think that very little time is spent on the ethics of that, on the risks that, on the regulation of that. And I think that that is where I hope that everyone who's watching us right now will say, you know what, I want to think for a second, not just about the positives, but what would happen if I'm on the other side of that, if I don't get that? You know, I'll give you an example that will kind of help illustrate that. In terms of health, a lot of us are doing a poor job maintaining our health. We eat bad things, even though we know that this is bad for us, we still eat it because it's tasty and it's here. We do poorly in managing our sleep. We all know that sleep is really important for cognitive skills, but many of us say, you know what, I'm going to go to sleep later today because I have this email I have to send, or one more thing I'm going to do before the meeting, and we're going to just sleep 6 hours, and we're hurting ourselves because we think of the short-term future rather than the long-term future. Presumably, having this ultimate thinking machine in our head will override us, and it will tell us when to go to sleep, and we'll sleep perfectly. It will just put us straight into deep sleep. It will control our food entirely, so the greatest food for us that perfectly align the taste and the nutrients we need are going to come. We're going to have perfect life, which means we're going to be healthier, and those without it will not. So suddenly we'll have gaps in health. You will have people dying because their limited brain cannot choose things that are good for them, where the people with the neural implants can just have better life. They're healthier, they're happier, they're friends with each other. This, to me, is a risk that I encourage everyone who's listening to us to spend time thinking about, because in a way, I think this is up to all of us as citizens to decide what world we want to have around us. I can go on and on, but I think that you probably are interested in more questions, so I'm going to choose other questions. Oh, and I think Eddie asked, can it be hacked? Absolutely. This neural implant, it's digital, it speaks to the outside world, it can be hacked, and it will be hacked. So you will have a person who wants to get to Wall Street and instead find himself in the Hudson River because they had someone else toy with their devices, and hack into them. So a big risk that we're all thinking about right now is how to secure it. In a way, because it's very limited right now, the security is relatively easy, but without disclosing too much, I can tell you that we already found one big hack in one of those devices that people put inside their head that can allow you to, of course, cause harm by activating and deactivating things, but also changing patterns of neural activity that may even change behavior. So yes, it is hackable. And in that realm, I think that you guys in the security domain who are watching us right now need to start working with scientists like myself. And ideally, if there's academics here that are in the cusp between neuroscience and computer science, you should learn both, because I think that you need to understand how the brain works, you need to understand how machines work to actually provide an interface that will do a good job communicating them, but also stop hacks. I think that to understand how they can be hacked, you have to understand the code of the brain and computer science. So I encourage many of you to reach out to your counterparts. If you're a neuroscientist, reach out to security experts near you. If you're a security expert, reach out to a neuroscientist. And if you can't find each other, find me and I will help you find each other, because it's such a critical moment right now that I think we all need each other. There's so many. Thank you. Someone says they love the talk. Another one says that they're happy and congrats on the Carnegie grant. Interesting. Someone knows about a grant that we got just recently to study another difficulty of the brain, which is what we call high-risk low-probability events. Turns out that human brains are not great in thinking about things that are very not probable. So the example we can take that's very, very kind of prominent in this grant is nuclear war. We all think, yeah, this will never happen. Like, we know that it's possible. We know that there are a number of nations that have nuclear weapons, and they kind of, hold each other in a way kind of tight by deterrence, by saying, if you do it, we do it. But we don't really imagine a world where suddenly nuclear bombs are going to start flying any day now. And because of that, many people don't vote by thinking about nuclear weapons. They don't really spend time worrying about that. They don't prepare for that, and so on. And that's, in any way, the sensible thing to do, because it is very unlikely. And the question that we ask is, how should we train the brain to think of things that are hugely devastating if they happen, but very unlikely? Another example that is more likely but more devastating that a lot of neuroscientists like myself are trying to work on is climate change. We know that people somehow, even if they're concerned about climate change, they don't really live life, not going right or left in the street because of climate change. They kind of say, yeah, it's looming danger, but I'm going to change very little about my life right now. Even the ones who are on the very kind of end of the spectrum of really concerned about that, not just the ones that deny it or even just aware of it but don't really act on it. And we try to see what can we do to the brain that will make people be able to imagine large scale, high impact, low probability events such that they will become very kind of prominent in our mind and we can think about them. Okay, are you aware, I'm sorry that I'm probably skipping questions because they pop up and I kind of go back and forth. Are you aware of any medical research where brain can be hacked to fix cerebral palsy or Parkinson's? Thanks. Okay, so that's I suspect this question has a story behind it that's very specific, so I'm going to give you a vague answer, and if it's helpful and if you want to know more, I suggest you reach out to me. I'm the easiest guy to find. If you just type my name, you find my website and my email and everything. And I'm extremely accessible. So if it's helpful to you, generally, first of all, we should distinguish between things that you can fix with stimulation in the brain and things we can fix by more chemicals in the brain. So the brain is kind of like a car, if you think, in that sense that it has a machinery. Those are the neurons and the connections, but it also needs gas or fuel. And that's chemicals like dopamine and serotonin and all kinds of chemicals. And when things don't work well, it could be that the machinery doesn't work or that you don't have the right chemicals. So if you don't eat enough A or B, you just lack some nutrients and your brain is going to work differently. For some of those entities, like you mentioned, the Parkinson's, one of the solutions is to just give you more dopamine. It's one of the molecules that the brain requires to either activate or deactivate systems. And the solution is many ways to give that. I wouldn't call it a hack because it's the way the system works and we just help it do it by realizing what it misses and giving it more. But I think that there are now more and more companies that essentially try to suggest different alternatives, like deep brain stimulations that solve that by actually opening the brain, putting a chip inside your head that will interact with the part of the brain that are faulty and zap them and activate them or deactivate them. So if you have tremor that constantly happens, we can actually zap the part that moves the hand, reverse current. So basically stop in the same frequency that your hand move will zap the part and basically stop it down. So a person who couldn't reach out for a glass of water and drink it can now do it. That's inside the brain, less frequent, even though it's working beautifully. There's still an assumption or an acceptance among doctors that brain surgery should be kind of last resort rather than the early resort. So many patients first get a lot of other options before they get the brain surgery, but brain surgery is one such solution. And I think that's similar to cerebral palsy. We can actually connect to the part that overwork or underwork and zap them. It becomes very, very specific quickly. So I think that I gave you a sense, but I think that if you have more specific questions, I think we can talk about it offline. Okay, there was a question about I guess what I think about companies that hack our attention. I'll make it a little bit broader. So there's a conversation in the last year. You could not avoid that, asking the question, what is the attention economy doing to our brain, and where do we stand on that? Companies like Twitter, Facebook, many. And I think putting it on one of them is doing disservice to the conversation. They're all around this idea that they're selling our eyeballs to companies. So their interest is in to have us spend more time on the platform using it, and people are starting to be unhappy about it and question the legitimacy of this thing, especially when we see that it affects elections and it actually causes harm in large scales. I'll say the following. First of all, there are alarming components to it. One of them is that most of my students, my graduate students, that finish their PhD in neuroscience, when they're finishing the PhD, they have the option of either going to academia, or going to industry, or going to kind of start something of their own. Many of them are at least approached, if not recruited fully, by those companies. So to me, the idea that companies that are offering attention, hiring neuroscientists to do the job, suggests that they recognize that neuroscientists know a lot about addiction and attention, and that they need those people to help them do a better job in getting us to spend more time. So if you just look at the kind of where the money is, we see that they are aware of the addiction component of the platforms, and they're using people who are experts in addiction to help work with those. I would say more than that we know enough about the brain now, and we have enough years of looking at those platforms to say that they actually have an impact on the brain. So the behavior that you exhibit neuroscience-wise, when you spend time clicking for one more, TikTok movie, looks in many ways like the one that you do when you pull a little kind of roulette machine, or what do you call it, like this casino machine that kind of shows you the 3 cherries or the 3 sevens, forget the name. Looks very similar. We kind of rush of dopamine that kind of engages our brains and makes us want more. All the techniques that are made to keep you a little longer, to give more data, is really a subset of toolboxes, and we've seen only the tip of the iceberg. I know, and neuroscientists will tell you, that there are many, many other ways to engage you even further. And right now, we're only seeing some that we can all understand, and there are going to be more and more coming soon that are even more devastating. So that said, what to do about it? So depends on who the audience. There are many things you can do. If you're one of those companies, you can kind of ask yourself, do you let your kids spend infinite time on your platform or not? And if you don't do it, you might say, okay, well, if I don't let my kids do it, I know back of my mind that something is not right, and I might kind of try to also help customers. Some platforms that are intermediary between the kind of addictive platforms and us are offering us tools like monitoring your time and helping us understand what's going on. That's another approach. Of course, if we're parents or if we're teachers, we can talk about it more, but those all are limited in that it's fun. And what we know about humans is that our brain is not good in delaying satisfaction. As I said earlier, if there's a cake in front of you and it's sugary and tasty, it's super hard for our brain to stop ourselves from eating it. We can find out excuses. We say, we're going to eat it right now, and next week I'm going to have a diet for the entire week. It's easy to say things about the future, but we fail in the present. And those platforms are not different. We can say, yeah, I'm not going to check my put platform here, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok for the next day, just this once, and then you get into this spiral. It works. So I think that scientists speak of Ulysses contracts, like contracts that you basically cut with yourself. You say, I'm going to create a code that if I spend more than 40 minutes on TikTok this morning, a check goes straight from my bank account to a charity that I hate. This way I'm helping others, and it kind of creates all kinds of ways for ourselves. Or we can relinquish the responsibility to someone else. And that's what the conversation is about a lot of times, by saying basically people cannot solve it. Like we ourselves don't have the capacity to do it. What we need is regulators and agents outside to do the job for us. And Europe has been very kind of aggressive on doing that. The US is less so. Other countries, a little bit based on the political sphere, are doing a different job. What I as a neuroscientist can tell you are A, that it works, B, that everyone by now who works on those platforms knows that it works. So it's not like you can't claim ignorance, and that it only kind of gets worse because the techniques that we uncover on how to make people want something more and crave them, including like doing things to them when they're sleeping, doing things to them when they're less, when they're younger, so the brain kind of is cement into wanting something later on that is hard to change. All of those things are only going to get harder because the techniques are known and they're just not being used right now. I think lead me to believe that that it needs to be voiced by society. And I'm going to speak outside of now being a professor for a second and say, there's an election in the US, for instance. There are many elections in Europe anytime soon. I'm constantly surprised by how little this is being asked. Tonight, there's a debate between the two candidates for presidency in the US. I'm willing to gamble that not a single question is going to be asked about their views on regulating those companies. A lot of topics are going to come up, war and healthcare and education. This will not come up. Even further, the role of AI in that, which is a risk that we all understand is there. At some point, there's going to be AI that's strong enough to actually change things that even the coders who code the algorithm wouldn't understand. And people like myself are worried about it, thinking about it, spending time researching that. It won't come up in the discussions at all. That's a problem. And the way to change that is by you guys asking. You ask me about it in the chat here. If you ask your congressman or woman, your senator, your local prime minister or president in each country, just ask that, they're going to have to come up with an answer and a policy. And this is how things get changed. I think in the 2016 election, the only conversation about technology entirely in the conversation was about Hillary Clinton's emails. That was the only component of security that came up. Nothing else even came up, let alone like, knowledge about like addiction or the role of AI or biases in technology and so on. We're doing better because people started asking. And if you guys ask more, there's going to be an answer and some policies. Okay. Someone says that they're very happy with the talk. Thank you. I also saw that we're at the 1 hour and 10 minutes mark. So maybe I'll take one more question and then we'll stop, because I think the promise was 90 minutes, but I also know that we started a bit late, so I'm not even sure where we are. And I spoke so fast, so you got like at least 90 minutes of content in 1 hour and 10 minutes. Okay, someone asked a question that's very specific about is it possible to measure voltage across neuron, take a few measurements and try to correlate with the hypothesis of actions like hand, leg? That's very specific. I was hoping to end with something big, but I'm gonna end with that unless a new kind of profound one comes up. So the currency of the brain, the language of the brain is known. We know how the brain speaks. The brain speaks in electrochemical signals. So if you think of a neuron as a cell in the brain, it's the building block of the brain. Another neuron, the way this one speaks to this one is by projecting current, electricity current, into this one. It's thick. And the frequency of the spikes, like how many times it speaks to this one, how strong is the communication between them, how close they are, how many connections they have, determines basically how likely this one to activate this one. The rule of thumb that neuroscientists speak about is fire together, wire together. If these two things constantly talk to each other, they essentially become almost like one. They behave in the same way when they talk to others. Once we know that, we can actually stick electrodes in your brain that sits right next to this neuron or that neuron, a microphone basically, that eavesdrops on the activity of this cell and knows when it fires. And if it knows what the cell does, for instance, it knows that every time it fires, the person says, I was thinking of my mother, we can basically predict what you're going to think about when this neuron fires. So we can say it fired, the person is going to say in a second that I think of their mother. The interesting thing is that some cells in our brain are hidden from us, as in they fire and they activate another one, they activate another one, and only the 10th neuron out there is awareness for us. Like we know what happened only when the 10th neuron fired. We don't know about the 9 that happened before. But if electrode sits here, we can actually decode your thoughts before they happen. I'll give you a concrete example that makes it clear. A project I've been doing right now with a big Formula 1 company asked the question, can we help the drivers control the car faster? So right now, when the driver drives the car, and let's say he sees another car coming from the right that's about to hit him, photons from the other car hit the driver's retina. They get processed for sight, being sent to the back of your brain where visual cortex is processing them, and then they get sent forward slowly until they reach back to the front of the brain, where the part of the brain that kind of says, okay, there's a car moving at this speed towards us, it's going to hit us in quarter of a second, let's slam the brake. The signal is being sent to the top of the brain where the motor cortex is, the part that actually controls the leg, sends a signal to the leg, that slams the brake, and the brake is stopping the car gradually. All of this process takes about a quarter of a second from the photon hitting your retina up to the moment you actually slam the brake. In a Formula 1 race, quarter of a second at, say, 100 miles per hour could be the difference between fatality or just a dent on the wing of the car. So what we're saying is, if I know by looking at neurons even in the very retina that you're seeing something that is danger, we can already send signals straight to your feet to slam the brake or even straight to the car to slow down. And this idea of actually connecting the brain to machines can speed up processes, make us do things without even knowing why we're doing them. Like the brake is going to be slammed before we even are aware why you want to do that, but save lives. So the question was, how do you measure that? And I gave you a little bit how and what we can do with that. And to your bigger question, which is, can we take measurements and basically predict the movement of your head, hand, nose? This was done. By now, neuroscientists can essentially map every part of your body to where it's controlled from in the brain, and you can entirely learn how to activate things. The hallmark of this work, this is going to be my way of saying something profound towards the end, is that we're thriving towards fixing most of nature's ailments in the brain. If you lost your hearing because your ears stopped working in the last 15 years, you're a candidate for something that we call a cochlear implant cochlear implant or retinal implant, where we either put a device that replicates the way the ears work on the outside and speaks directly to your brain on the inside, such that this cochlear implant replicates the way the ears work, and you can learn to hear again. So deafness could be fixed within a few months if you let the brain process the new signal that comes from the device and find meaning in it. I was alluding quickly while speaking about retinal implants. There's a clinical trial that just completed a few months ago that shows that if you're blind, we can actually build a retinal implant, a device that you put instead of your retina that processes photons, turns them into the language of the brain, feeds them into the right parts of the brain, lets the brain find the meaning in those, and essentially learn to see again. And people under this clinical trial who were blind learned to first see shadows and color contrast, and then movement, and then shapes, and gradually they learned to see, giving sight to the blind. I'm pretty sure that it was in the New Testament as like a godly endeavor. Similarly, there are trials now going from 2011 that take people who lost the ability to control their limbs, mainly soldiers who came back from war and were injured with some nerve that was severed between the head and, say, their arms, that we can now repair and teach them by reading the brain activity on the part that controls the arm, how to regain control of either their own arm or a prosthetic arm that behaves like it's their arms. And the point of all of that is that as a step one, in the next couple of years and already in the current time, we're doing a good job in restoring functions that were lost. And I'm going to end with a profound statement, which is that we're thinking right now and playing with, and I'm, as we speak, writing a paper about that hopefully will be out in the next couple of weeks, about what we call human version 2.0, which I'm sorry about the sirens in the background. This is New York. Which asks the question, can we enhance humans? So can we take senses that you don't have right now And as long as the brain's language is clear, plug those into your brain and have you do more. So for example, if nature has animals that have similar brain to ours, but different sensors, like the bat, who can echolocate. So it doesn't see it, echolocates by distributing ultrasounds and bouncing back from walls and from obstacles and figuring out what it does. Can we take the echolocating ears of the bat and plug them into the brain of a human, have the brain learn to process those such that we can suddenly echolocate or see infrared or feel the magnetic fields of Earth? Birds have that. Birds can actually feel when they fly where is north all the time. So they have a sensor that speaks to their brain. Can we take the sensor and plug it into our brain and learn to see more of the world? The idea of human version 2.0 is that we can actually enhance humans and give us a richer experience of the world by supplementing what the brain is doing. So not just fix deafness or blindness, but actually give you the ability to hear more. Like dogs can hear more frequencies than humans can. Can we do that? Or snakes see not just what we see. They have heat beats. They actually see the world in kind of shades of red and blue, and they can kind of see heat. So we can actually steal their eyes, put them straight into our brain, and learn to see more of the world. All of this is a process that neuroscientists are playing with, and I'm very excited about, that allows us to actually enrich our experience in this world. This was about 1 hour and 15 minutes of me talking all over about my work as a neuroscientist, some of my interest in the world of business and how it can be relevant, how hacking is changing, and how we all need you as business leaders, as computer security experts, and as scientists to come together and help me and my colleagues start protecting the world from technology that is going to go away and might change our reality. As you can see, I have a lot more to say. There's a list of topics that I was going to touch on if it came up that I didn't get to, but I'm really thankful that I could be helpful to those of you who find it interesting, and truly say that if there's anything that you want to know more about, I'm A, extremely accessible, and B, ready to come back again in the future, because you got only half of what you were supposed to get. You didn't get Eddie to probe me and ask me questions, so I got to do whatever I want. Maybe with him, we will talk about totally different things. So maybe in the future, we're going to do a conversation that is even a dialogue, rather than just me speaking into the void. Thank you so much for joining me here.